All right, guys, back on Southeastern 16 with Max Barr and our special guest, Brandon Ramsey. You heard him this summer on the SEC basketball experience we did here, talking about Kentucky heading into the season. Of course, Brandon covers Kentucky for KSR, Kentucky Sports Radio. Brandon, always great to chat with you. And I mean, we talked this summer, and I think what was interesting about that chat was I think the question I asked you, I was like, okay, what could be the biggest strength and the biggest weakness of this team in terms of like, if it all comes together, it looks like this. If it doesn't, it could be this. But so far, I think, in terms of answering that question, how could it all come together? Well, a lot of those pieces have connected for Kentucky to get off to an 8-1 start here.
Yeah, it's certainly been towards the better end of the spectrum of what any of us really could have thought. That's something I've kind of continued to say as Kentucky has kind of hit some of these different checkpoints, whether it was beating Duke early on or kind of whipping up on a lot of the non-conference opponents, then obviously beating Gonzaga. It was like whatever you thought this team was going to be prior to November 4th, whether you thought it's a 500 team, whether you thought it was a Final Four team or anything in between, you have to be further down that spectrum than you were on November 4th based on what you've seen. I mean, Kentucky now arguably has one of the best resumes in college basketball with wins over Duke and Gonzaga through the first, month and a week or so of the college basketball season. So yes, it's certainly in terms of how it's came together, it's been about as good as really anybody could have expected. And especially when you consider like this team hasn't necessarily shot it outstanding over the last 4 games. I mean, they haven't shot it well at all over the last 4 games. And, there's, sitting around 35-36% on the season. And then you play the last game without Lamont Butler, who's proven to be, arguably the MVP of this team. So yeah, you have to be excited about what you've seen if you're a Cats fan so far this season.
So, Brandon, you brought up Lamont. Can we just get a quick state of the union on the injuries for the Cats? Because that's why right before we went live, I was throwing a temper tantrum trying to find Cats injury news.
Yeah, so the unfortunate part is that they have been, they're all at the point guard position, which a hurts your depth, and B, it's arguably the most important position on the floor. Kirk Risa, he's going to be out for a while. That's reported as like a 3 to 6 week issue. Who knows? That's probably just up to his recovery, his pain tolerance. We'll see how all that goes with Lamont Butler. I still haven't seen or heard any definitive news in terms of him playing on Wednesday night. I think that almost regardless, it'll be limited action against Colgate because you play Louisville on Saturday, then you play Ohio State the following Saturday. Those are certainly more important Lamont Butler games. I would hope that Kentucky can beat Colgate. Even if Travis Perry plays 40 minutes at point guard, I think we'll probably be okay. But yeah, I think the Lamont issue, we're not out of the weeds yet with it, but it sure doesn't seem like, unless we're just kind of, getting the wool pulled over our eyes here, which it seems like Coach Pope's a little different than Coach Cal in that way that, I don't think we're just being lied to necessarily. I think that we'll see him at least against Louisville, if not, in some limited minutes on Wednesday.
Nice.
Brandon, you're someone who breaks down the film as good as anyone, and I think you just brought up 2 names, Coach Cal, Coach Pope. And like it or not, that's the conversations that is had whenever we talk about Kentucky this year, because obviously we cover the entire SEC. We're also talking about Arkansas. And when you see the offensive differences as you look at the film this season so far, what is it, and not even just a comparison to Cal, but what is it that has made Mark Pope so special in terms of the way that they play on the offensive end of the floor? Because again, it is just such an exciting brand of basketball, and we talk about just sort of the different guys that can contribute at different spots, the depth on this team, and that has certainly been one of the reasons why they've gotten off to such a great start.
Yeah, it's just so kind of dynamic and variable offensively. That's something that I've focused a lot on in some of our film breakdowns, is that you can think that you kind of know what Kentucky's about to run coming down. Like they might even call something like, okay, we're getting to a zoom action here, or whatever it may be. Well, there's like 8 different variations of zoom that you can run based on what the defense gives you. Like you might curl the down screen and then the screener comes off the handoff, or you might back cut it and then the screener comes off, or 3 or 4 different things depending on does your defender go up through, does he chase you, do they switch it? We've seen kind of counters to all these different things. And I think that's what makes this offense so, like I said, dynamic and hard to guard and multiple, is that, even the offense doesn't really know what it's going to be until you see the defense. And that makes it, almost impossible to guard, especially over the course of 40 minutes, because you're just going to keep executing. And these guys, especially for being 12 new pieces that have never played together, only one of them have ever played for, Mark Pope before, for them to have the grasp that they had, especially in the second half against Gonzaga, there was just kind of some innate, these guys get it and they know what they want to get to offensively. And for that to come together, with only having a few months together and only having 9 games together now, I think is really special. So that's what you're seeing offensively, is just how dynamic, how hard to guard some of these actions can be. And then Kentucky's been one of the elite teams in transition so far this year too. And that's kind of, where everything starts as well, is that you're going to play fast and you're going to score as quickly as possible.
Max, before you jump in, I'm going to quickly tell everyone about our friends at BetOnline, the world's most trusted betting platform, your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds, in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and ability to watch the games as they happen. If you want to bet on Kentucky and Colgate, go right ahead, folks. You can go to BetOnline. Largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, college basketball, NHL, UFC. Head to BetOnline today. Use that promo code BLEAV, BLEAV, for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. Max.
Brandon, so you mentioned the second halves, and I have that down as something I wanted to bring up. Now, obviously, Pope is making these really, really smart and tactical second half adjustments, but I mean, it's to a level that I have not seen in a long time in the entire nation. Consistent second half adjustments that are completely changing the game. Like a night and day first half, second half. What have you seen in these second half adjustments?
It really has been special. I mean, especially, looking at the 2 marquee wins of this season.
Yep.
I mean, they're games where, quite frankly, I mean, people sometimes give me hate online for how positive I am about Kentucky, which is weird, but it's a different subject for a different day. But, I'm generally as positive as they come. Against Duke and against Gonzaga at halftime, I was texting my buddies being like, hey, we're just not as good as these guys. And it doesn't mean the sky's falling. It just means we're not as good as 2 of the other 10 best teams in college basketball. And then you just find a way to win the game. And I do think, something I've talked about with the offense, we were just discussing, what makes this offense so special. Well, I think one of the things is, because it's so multiple and because it's so much read and react, I think that each game there's going to be some periods of figuring out what works. What do you need to get to? What is the defense giving you? And that can create some lulls and that can create some frustrations for pieces of the game. But then also it's much easier to fix the problems than some other styles of offense. So I think that that's just something, hopefully we don't have to experience this all season to the level that you have in those 2 games. Hopefully I don't feel like you're down and out at halftime of 18 SEC games, because quite frankly, the SEC is that good, as you guys know. But I do think that you'll see that continue to be some sort of a trend of, okay, this offense has to take a few minutes to figure out what is it that we can execute this game, and then we can all come together and fix it in the second half or out of a timeout or whatever it may be.
I think the defensive side, too, has been so fascinating to watch them on that side, because I mean, again, when we had the conversation this summer, sure, we were all focusing on, all right, hey, this is going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be so different with Mark Pope's offense, and they're going to be running, like you said, all sorts of actions, and it's really going to be exciting. But I think the defensive side of things has really been something where you've seen so many different guys kind of step up on that side. And again, you're the one breaking down the film, seeing those things. What has it been with them defensively? I mean, Max, we've talked about the perimeter play on the defense, where, everyone – we'll point out Takai Ziegler and Jemai Mashak at Tennessee in terms of 2 of the best you're going to find in terms of a combination of guards on the perimeter. But then we're okay, look what Butler and Oweh can do. And we just keep going down the line. We're these guys are defending unlike anyone out there. What is it, Brandon, that's just made them, just maybe not as efficient on defense as they are on offense, but they're not that far away. I mean, they're a top 25 team in the country in terms of adjusted defensive efficiency and all that right now.
Right. I don't think any of us, regardless, I talked earlier about that spectrum of, what you expected from this Kentucky team. I don't think that anybody, regardless of where you fell on that spectrum, expected this to be a top 25 defense in college basketball. I thought it could be pretty good. I thought it could be, top 50 and kind of good enough to carry a top 10 offense, but I didn't expect it to also be part of the reason you're winning some college basketball games. And they've been great at taking away the three. Some of that, we all know there's a lot of variance to 3-point percentage. Like, do I think teams are going to shoot 25% against us from 3-point range the whole season? I doubt it. If they do, that'd be awesome. I'll sign up for that. But I don't think that'll remain. But heck, I mean, we talked about the offensive adjustments at halftime. Kentucky just played 10 plus possessions of 1-3-1 zone in the second half and overtime of the game against Gonzaga, and that change was a big part of winning the game because you took Nolan Hickman, or excuse me, Ryan Nembhard from going 7 assists in the first half to 1 assist in the second half because he can't get dribble penetration. You're staying between him and the basket. You're not having to help on the roll and tag and all this kind of stuff. So it just makes it a lot harder. And that's just one example of one defensive adjustment you made there. I mean, against Clemson, you completely cleaned up the defensive glass after getting dominated in the first. That was an issue against Gonzaga too. So yes, I think defensive rebounding has been a strength so far, which I honestly didn't expect. They're 39th in the country in defensive rebounding percentage right now, which certainly isn't bad. Like I said, they're taking away the three. I thought they would force more turnovers. That's something that I've been a little bit surprised. We talked about, or you guys mentioned, Oweh and Butler and, their impact on the perimeter. I kind of thought you would see a little bit more havoc from this defense, but heck, if we're going to clean the glass and get teams to miss, I'll sit back and force less turnovers. So yeah, it's been, I think the offense has kind of been proof of concept. It's what we kind of hoped it would be. The defense has just been better than what we thought it was going to be. And I think that's, part of why you're 8-1 with wins over Duke and Gonzaga.
Yeah, Brandon, kind of jumping all over the place here, but talking about the Zags got me thinking about it. What does a game like that do for a guy like Jackson Robinson? Not only just him as an individual, but kind of how a game like that maybe impacts what this team can do with that backcourt versatility moving forward.
Well, the number one thing is that I think you see that Jackson Robinson can play some point guard going forward.
Yeah.
And he's going to have to because, hopefully the number of games without Lamont Butler is, not very many going forward. But we know there's going to be several games without Kirk Risa. And that's 15 minutes or so at the one that you're going to have to piece together. And I think that you proved down the stretch, it was winning time when Jackson Robinson had to run the point. I mean, Kirk Risa goes out with like 8 minutes to go in regulation. So it's pretty much Jackson Robinson the rest of the way. And he did it. If you look at some of the numbers on synergy going into that game, even, he's been really good scoring it off of ball screens, which, kind of gives you, some point guard tendencies there. I think he's improved as a passer this season compared to some of, his time at BYU or certainly going back to the Arkansas days. I think that you've seen that can be part of his game. Is it where he's best? Maybe not, but he's going to fill in for those kind of backup point guard minutes, and you're going to see that going forward. And also, I think that you saw, Andrew Carr was the focal point of the offense, I felt like, in the second half and overtime. But you also saw some shots from Jackson Robinson that, to me, answered the question that a lot of people had going into the season is, all right, we know Coach Pope's offense is fun. We know they're going to run all this intricate stuff, and it's going to be fun for nerds like me to break it down on film. But who's the dude that can just get a freaking bucket? Who is that guy? Well, like I said, schematically, you were able to get Andrew Carson buckets, but Jackson Robinson was the guy that, he can just get to that floater. He can turn a corner and go lay it up. He can create some space to get a three off if he needs to. I mean, that three that he hit that, bounced to the ceiling and went in, that was a self-created three. And you need some shots like that to win tough games. So I think that you also answered that question of, all right, we do have that guy, and his name is Jackson Robinson.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good question, Max, because I feel like it ties into something else where we talk about the second half adjustments for Kentucky. And it's not the sexiest thing. If you're just looking at it, that's not what everybody's going to be talking about. But I think it's kind of the resiliency of this team has been something that stood out the most to me when they find themselves in some of these situations. look at the Clemson game, right? Andrew Carr did not have his best game there. Like, we understand that. But then to bounce back and have a good game the way he did against Gonzaga, we can say that about other guys on this team too. And just it seems like when this team has been in those situations, even the game against Duke, Clemson, even having a chance there, knowing that was going to be a tough, true road game. And then again, like we said, it sort of escalates even further when you get into a game against the Zags in that kind of setting, find a way to win. I feel like, Brandon, if we're looking at we're projecting ahead, which is a long season. But we've said Max and I keep trying to sort of not add in like any bias on the SEC, but we're like, what else do we say at this point? If we're looking at this many teams that feel like they're national title contenders right now, but I think if you have to put Kentucky in that conversation because you are seeing some of those intangibles like that, whether it's the stuff we mentioned earlier with Mark Pope's adjustments, whether it is having someone like Jackson Robinson who can step up now if you have some injury situations. Andrew Carr, Amari Williams, like Otega Owe, who we barely talk. I mean, it's probably our fault, but like we didn't talk enough about this guy coming into the season, us ourselves. And so I just keep looking at all the intangibles it feels like this team has, and that's the thing to me. The more people look at this so far, and you'll have different fans out there say, well, Kentucky's just kind of playing over their head and all that. Maybe they are to an extent, but if I'm looking at a team and I see the way they're built, barring injuries, like they're going to be in the conversation, I feel like, for an SEC championship, a Final Four as we go throughout the rest of the way, because we've seen a lot so far that makes me feel like this is the kind of team with the experience, the resiliency, they're up for something like this.
Well, I think, to the point you're talking about with intangibles and some of these bounce back games we've seen, or, even within games that we've seen, like it's called being old. Like, these guys have played 100+ college basketball games. It's not the first time that they've been punched in the mouth on the road. It's not the first time where they've been dominated on the glass and their manhood gets questioned at halftime by their coach. Like, they've all been through these things before. So it's not a surprise when they're down, 9 at halftime against Duke and Atlanta, or it's not a surprise when they're down 16 to Gonzaga and Seattle. Like they've all been a part of games where they've probably had comebacks like this before, and they can, even if it's Drexel against Fordham or whatever, like, Amari Williams has, been through a halftime like that. So I think that, that part of it probably isn't as much of a shock as some of these other things, because these guys are old, they're veterans, they've played a bunch of college basketball games. They're not, there's nothing that they're going to see this year for the first time. They might see it for the first time together, but individually, they've all been through pretty much anything that can happen over the course of a college basketball season.
No, great point.
So Brandon, well, how many games are we in now? 9 games. So as we kind of get a better picture of where teams are really at compared to preseason rankings and stuff. What types of teams moving forward when you're previewing Kentucky's games? What styles of teams are you like? This is a good matchup. This plays right into what we want to do. And then what style of team is like, I'm not feeling great about this one moving forward. Obviously, the SEC, if you play on the road, tough game. Okay, just automatic. But what styles are you looking like for?
I think, to answer the ones that maybe concern me the most, I think right now it's got to be the teams that are more overtly physical and they're going to put their hands on you. I mean, I think we've seen that kind of in each of the games where Kentucky has played high major competition. That's put them on their heels at times. Like the size of Duke on the interior, I think really hurt Kentucky, especially in the first half. Like there were just some rushed shots. You were struggling to score at the rim. I mean, I tweeted out earlier today that Kentucky's been the best at rim finishing team in college basketball this season, shooting, like 73, 74%. Well, that Duke game, it was closer to 50% because, Malawak and these guys are just, being 7-2 and really hurting you around the basket. The physicality of Clemson, I got mad on Twitter and talked about the officiating a little bit, but like that's going to happen. That's going to happen at Mississippi State. That's going to happen at Texas A&M. Like it's going to happen all season against these teams that kind of, want to be physical, want to put their hands on you. They're not going to call all of them as much as I want them to. And it's going to be a part of it. And I think that will, Kentucky's not the, outside of Otega Owe, like, Jackson Robinson doesn't necessarily want the game to be super physical. I don't think Andrew Carr necessarily wants the game to be super physical. Amari Williams, though he looks like $1 million, he's, not the most physical guy in the country. So I think that those type of teams can, potentially give Kentucky some problems, but we've already seen it now where you kind of fix that, as I said, with the game going on, and you have enough skill. And I think that really almost any other style, I think Kentucky's just going to be better at it than a lot of people, because this offense is just so dynamic and so good, and especially for 9 games into it, it seems so complete and cohesive for this point in the season, and you have to imagine that's only going to get better. So yeah, I think outside of those overtly physical teams, there's not too much that's gonna really give me a lot of concern going into many games this season, other than obviously the fact that like the SEC has a ton of good basketball players, and it's always hard to play against really good basketball teams.
Yeah, definitely an unprecedented start, as we said, for the SEC this year, without question. Brandon, we can wrap up on this. 4 games to go in the non-conference schedule. Colgate mentioned coming up on Wednesday night. They play Louisville at home on Saturday. They've got the game against Ohio State on December the 21st at MSG, and then they've got the game against Brown before they start SEC play January 4th against Florida. Just storylines you're looking at over the next, let's say, 3 weeks or so. Obviously, the injury stuff we talked about earlier. What do you most want to see from this team here as they do navigate the rest of this non-conference schedule? Because it is kind of a mixed bag, right? We talk about there are games against Colgate and Brown, but then there are games against what is clearly an improved Louisville team, and then kind of that intriguing one against Ohio State at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, I think, obviously, first and foremost, it's going to be Lamont Butler and how he gets reintegrated into this lineup, and how healthy he is when he exactly is healthy. But beyond that, I think probably 2 things I'm looking at the most. First would certainly be the 3-point shooting. The last 4 games, it's been under 30%, and you've made less than 10 threes in each of those games. If that continues, it'll eventually become a problem. Now, I've said kind of the last thing I'm going to worry about this team about is shooting, because quite frankly, there's just so much proof over these long, college careers, and many of these guys, like, they're high percentage shooters. I don't think that all of a sudden changed because they're wearing a Kentucky uniform. So, it's going to take me a while, but like, if we get through these next 4 games that you're asking me about, and it still isn't good, the alarm bells might start ringing a little bit going into SEC play. So I do want to see, how Kentucky starts making shots. And then secondly, I do think that, especially against Louisville and Ohio State, who are, clearly the better teams compared to Colgate and Brown, can we have better starts against some of these teams? Because, let's face it, Kentucky's played 3 really good teams this year, and it hasn't been very pretty in the first half of any of them. So, if that continues with as tough as the SEC is, you're just going to put yourself in a very precarious situation to just lose a lot of games, because it's going to be really hard to come back consistently. I want to see against Louisville and Ohio State, Kentucky come out and execute from the beginning, have a halftime lead, play with a lead, and kind of show that they're better for 40 minutes against other good competition, as opposed to always having to, kind of figure it out and everything go perfectly in the second half to get a win.
Max, anything else before we wrap up?
Yep, of course there is something else. I did it in the summer, and I'm telling y'all right now, at Ramsey KSR on Twitter, the best follow in Cats Hoops lands. Breakdowns, good stats, all you need. I use it more than you know. Give this man a follow.
Brandon,
thank you. That's a better shout out than I could give myself. So appreciate that.
Brandon, you're the man. We appreciate you joining us as always. I'm sure we'll catch up with you again here in the near future.
Anytime, guys. Kentucky. Yep. Thanks for having me.